Customer says I'm cheating him out of his food, so I give him exactly what he wants. When I was 13 or 14, I decided I wanted a PS3. My dad refused to buy me one, but my uncle made me an offer I couldn't refuse. He said that if I worked at his sweets shop for the 2 months of summer break, he'd buy me a PS3 and some games in lieu of payment. For teenage me with no commitments, this seemed fantastic. Uncle sells almost every type of Indian sweet and snack, from rasgullas to samosas to even dosas now. Come for the samosa, stay for the chai, I used to say. But we sold a special kind of snack known as a mini samosa in his shop. They're like samosas, but smaller, about 3.5 to 4 centimeters in size, which is about 1 in 2,286 of a football field for my American friends who use freedom units. They were sold by weight in sealed packs of 250 grams and 500 grams, as these were the most common amounts people bought. Making those packages turned out to be my job. You see, sometime between now and when Uncle started his business, he realized that 250 grams was roughly the weight of 28 mini samosas, and thus 56 were 500 grams. So instead of weighing each packet, I was told to just pack by counting individual items, which was easier and saved time. We also sold them individually for people who wanted larger, smaller, or unusual amounts. This was also around the time when our government started airing customer awareness PSAs, Jago Grahak Jago, for my fellow Indians. Basically, just telling customers to be aware of fraudulent business people. This is relevant. So one particularly hot afternoon, it was just me and my uncle at the shop. In India, frequent power cuts are very common during summers, and thus there were no fans or AC running in the shop. Both tempers and temperatures were running high at the shop that day. It was then that the villain of our story, Mr. Karan, made his entry. He was a local resident and a regular. He seemed angry from the onset when he barged into the shop. He took a look at the fans and saw they weren't running, then angrily picked up 500-gram pack of samosas and asked, "How many samosas are in this thing?" "That's 500 grams, I said. "I said how many, not how much," Mr. Karan literally screamed. "Again, how many are in this?" 56, I replied immediately, since, I packed them. "How can you be so sure? You didn't even count. You're trying to cheat me." Mr. Karan was now in full-scale Karen mode. "I demand you pack me 500 grams of those individual ones, and don't you dare cheat me again." I looked over at my uncle, wet with sweat, fanning himself with yesterday's newspaper. He slowly nodded. I beamed a huge smile. "Sure, sir, whatever you want." So I took a bag, packed up some samosas, and started putting them on a balance. I kept counting samosas as I put them in until they were a little over 500 grams. Then I removed the last samosa and the weight fell below 500. Now, keeping my eye contact with Mr. Karan, I crushed the samosa and started putting its powdery remains in the bag until it was exactly 500 grams. But wait, there's more. Mr. Karan apparently didn't seem to mind powdered samosa, but instead asked smugly, "So, how many samosas now?" 48, I claimed triumphantly. You see, sometime in the past, my uncle's old chef retired and the new chef made samosas with a little bit more filling in them. They looked the same size on the outside and only weighed a couple of grams more each, and since he made them in bulk and also sold to other shops in the area, the price wasn't too much of an issue. So my uncle let it slide. But those couple of grams add up on mass orders, and that's what Mr. Karan found out the hard way. He looked sheepishly at the pre-packaged samosas and then at his own package and asked if he could buy the former instead. "No, my nephew made a package specially for you at your own request, so that's what you have to buy," my uncle finally spoke. Mr. Karan silently took his pack, paid, and left. He was a lot more respectful during his subsequent visits. I was reminded of this story yesterday when my PS3 finally died. As evident, English is not my first language. In fact, it's not even my third, so please excuse any mistakes. I wish you all a very happy Diwali. May your happiness levels be as high as my electricity bill this month. I really have to know whether that was Mr. Karan's actual name, because that translates way too well into Karen, the villain of approximately 60% of our given stories on the channel. But aside from his very rude and abrupt entry, It sounds like he rather accepted his fate, rather than pig-headishly fighting on and eventually just fleeing the store like our more conventional Karens would do. It seems like Indian male Karen learned to temporarily keep his entitled nature in check in this particular store. Also, can we talk about how excellent the author's writing was, despite his apologies at it being far from his main language? Like, I didn't have to change the script from his original story at all. He wrote more fluently and with fewer mistakes than the narrator's day-to-day work. Very impressive. Also, as someone whose PC regularly overheats in a very cold country, I don't understand how such machines survive any amount of strenuous gaming in such a hot and humid place as India. Hopefully you're able to get a replacement console soon. Also, I really want a samosa right now. So thanks for that. If you don't have a good review, don't say anything at all. Say no more. This happened years and years ago when my school had taken us on a 2-day field trip to a hill station close to a city. It's like a small vacation town in the hills outside of major urban areas of India. All of us on the trip were kids who were in the 6th to 8th grade, and the trip was a blast, and everyone had fun. The event happened just before we were supposed to leave. So our school had a weird policy where after every field trip, they would gather all of the students in one room and pick out a random group of students and ask them to say a couple of sentences about the venue and experience, whatever. 5 of us were chosen for it this time, and we were asked to wait in an adjacent room and come out one by one. It was all cool till the first girl went up to the mic and said, "The experience was nice, but I felt that the food that was served was stale. I think a few people got sick." As soon as she finished speaking, the vice principal flew into a rage as she descended on this poor girl and started screaming, "Who do you think you are? These guys have been working super hard for us all weekend. If you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all." Now, her reaction might not make sense, but the hotel where we were staying belonged to some relative of hers, which is probably why we were there in the first place, and she felt some kind of way about that. The girl almost started crying as she came back to us. I was up next, so I was standing and waiting, but the VP went on a long rant about being well-behaved and setting a good example. I think at this point it's worth talking about one of the other kids chosen to do this pointless exercise. He was an older kid in the 8th grade and he had had an accident on the trip, so his arm was slinged up. The accident was, I think, caused partly by negligence from the hotel staff. I'm blanking on the details right now, and he was fully prepared to talk about it. So his tantrum made him especially annoyed, especially because the same vice principal had refused to send him home early from the trip because it would cost too much. He told us this later. The guy holds my arm and tells me, "Hey, she said don't say anything if it's not good, so don't say anything." So I went out, stood there for a few seconds, said, "I don't have anything to say," and came back. The kid who went after me did the same, and this guy went last. He goes up to the mic, and at this point, the VP is shouting again, "Did you do this? Don't you dare say nothing," or something of that sort. He said, "I loved being there. Glad I was able to be here even after I hurt my arm. I'll be really sad now that I have to go back to my parents and an actual doctor." The vice principal lost her crap at that. Most of the kids were too young to understand sarcasm, but they definitely did start laughing at her. She threatened to suspend and fine everyone there, and she delayed the buses back to our town by 2 hours as punishment. A few days later, they called my parents in for a disciplinary meeting, and the VP started narrating the story to them. When she got to the point about the complaint from that first girl, my dad said, "Wait, so the hotel was serving stale food?" I think the VP got kind of shook by that bit because I was asked to go back to class shortly after, and nothing else came of it. I've been seeing a lot of comments generally to the tune of, "How could she do this with no repercussions?" So, I'm from India, and schooling culture in the country is very disciplinarian in nature. Most teachers and parents would agree that kids need to be put in their place and all that good stuff. A lot of us were so disillusioned with the way the school treated students that towards the end of my time there, students used to keep whatever trophies they won for the school within the team, because usually they won in spite of the school and not because of it. As I'm remembering some details slowly, I'm not sure if that older kid for sure had a broken arm, but I just remember it being in a weird sling and he was wearing some kind of wrist brace too. There were smaller clinics in the area, so he may not have been completely neglected in terms of immediate medical attention. I was wondering what part of the world this was, where teachers could get away with so blatantly mistreating the kids like this without being fired with prejudice before the kids' tears had even hit the ground. I know that in the US it feels like they can get fired for both perceived physical bullying, like touching a student on the arm, and having the sheer nerve to suggest things like maybe there's something in favor of this evolution thing people are talking about. So yeah, I know nothing about the education system in India, but it sounds like way too big a step in the opposite direction. They shouldn't be ruling over the kids with an iron grip and preventing them from getting medical treatment with no fear of consequences. That is some terrific solidarity on display from these kids, complying with the instructions given to them to the letter. It's a shame that they didn't get the chance to goof around like kids should have the chance to. This passive resistance is the sort of thing that you see in people who are subjected to injustices from above like this all the time. They likely don't have any other way to fight it, so it's the best they can do until they're out of school. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, linked below. Also, go to amithejerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. You want to return everything? Okay, watch me scan every item. This was back when I worked as a manager at a grocery store. I worked customer service, but when it would get busy, I'd run the register until it slowed down. One night, I had to take a few customers, and this one big guy comes in, and he was really just in a terrible mood, huffing and puffing. He looked like he came straight out of Duck Dynasty. Beard, camo, hat, you get the picture. We finished the transaction and I'm starting to head back to customer service when the guy looks at his root beer that he just bought and says, "Diet? I didn't want diet. You know what? Forget it. I don't want any of this crap anymore, just take it all back." So now I'm struggling to figure out why, 1, this is my fault, and 2, why he can't just switch it out for the regular soda. His order was huge, and normally in these situations, I just put it through as a refund for whatever amount was on the receipt. But since this guy was being a real prick, I just decided to scan and return each item individually. Now he's getting more mad and cursing, saying to hurry up, and I just responded, "Sorry man, it has to go through our system." And then he screams, "Give me the fricking money!" So security heads up front. I just laughed and said that's not how it works. We finish everything, he takes his money and leaves. About a week later, I'm running the register again and he jumps on my line. When he saw I was the one on register, he tried to get out of line, but all the other registers had huge lines as well. It's finally his turn and he says, "Hey man, I'm really sorry about the other day. I was having a bad day and I shouldn't have taken it out on you." I was a little surprised, not gonna lie, and I told him, "Hey man, stuff happens, no worries." And we're cool, he's always super nice to me when he comes in and haven't had a problem since. I just wish every Karen and Ken acted like him in the end. Interesting. I'm not sure you would have ever gotten the apology and the subsequent relaxing of tensions if this customer hadn't been forced into your queue, but it does sound like everyone benefited from this being the case. It sounds like he did behave like a jerk, but that might be down to circumstance. I've definitely blown up at someone before due to unrelated circumstances and felt terrible about it afterwards. And his outburst of, "Forget it, just take it all back," is several orders of magnitude below the really big offenders we hear about on the channel. So let's call this a rehabilitated one-time jerk offender and get back to crucifying the real pieces of crap here. Compliance with company timesheet requirements resulted in a 40% pay increase. The background. I've been a freelance contractor for over 30 years in the UK and worked for many companies, usually on an hourly or daily rate. About 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to work for a client on a 6-month contract on a daily rate, and also to work from home except for some site visits for meetings. Since I was working from home, I was able to work my own hours. I was judged basically on my output, not the bum-on-seat hours. I'd work whenever I wanted, an hour here or there, multiple breaks during the workday, and also sometimes at weekends whenever I felt like it. However, I ensured that I complied with at least the 40-hour-week minimum, even though I was on a daily rate. The way that it worked on this contract was that I'd submit my timesheet for my boss to sign. That would be sent to my agency, and they'd do all the work to create invoices to the end client and pay me based on how long I worked that week. I didn't have to submit invoices to the agency, they used something called self-invoicing. Now, because of the hassle of trying to record all the start times, times for breaks, etc., it was a pain to fill in the client's timesheet, which only allowed for one start time, one lunch break, one end time, and so on because I was on a daily rate. So I'd just record a standard 9 to 5:30 start and stop and a 30-minute lunch every weekday, knowing I was putting in the hours and not cheating the client. This was all well for a couple of months. My, quote, boss would sign the timesheet and the agency would invoice the client and just send me the money each month. At some point, I'd reconcile my books, noting the payments against my days worked. My boss, note the quotes, was the client person I reported to. In contractor speak, he was the client representative, not employed by my limited company or the intermediate agent. At some point, my boss balked at how I was filling in my timesheet and asked for it to be more detailed. He was simply making his own job harder by having to check the math for all the individual hours. This is where the malicious compliance took over. I'd carefully record all the periods I was working, which I did anyway, and then create a timesheet for the week. This resulted in several pages of timesheets rather than the previous 5 lines, now showing all periods I worked, all breaks I took, total hours for each day, total hours for the week, and my boss would need to check all of this and sign it, and we continued that way for a while. Now, you may think this was only a small malicious compliance. It took me extra effort to comply, and my boss got the detailed timesheet he required and nothing changed. However, there was an unexpected consequence of this compliance which was rooted in the contract I'd signed, and the contract that the client had signed with the intermediate agency. It came down to the definition of a working day. Remember, I was on a daily rate, not an hourly rate, even though the client insisted on a breakdown of all my hours. After a few months when I tried to reconcile my own company's books, it seemed I was getting paid more than I expected. 40% more to be precise. When I investigated, it turned out that I'd overlooked my contract that stated that I was paid a full day's contract rate irrespective of how many hours I worked on that day. So if I happened to work 10 hours, I'd just get the day rate. But if I worked for only an hour, I'd still get the full day rate. Since I was now giving a timesheet that also detailed the few hours I might work on Saturday and Sunday, as well as the 5 work weeks, even though I was still only working a total of 40 hours, I was getting paid for 7 days rather than 5 days. I decided not to bring it to the notice of my boss since I doubt he had the visibility of the invoices. He was just signing off my timesheet every week. This resulted in an unexpected pay rise for the final couple of months of my contract. I just wish I'd complied earlier in my contract. I was never approached about the discrepancy and went over the next few years to have 3 more contracts with that client, but not on the same terms. The contract was written by the agency, not me. They would have been well aware of the standard contract, and it was also in their interest since they got a percentage. It was malicious in that I knew the manager would need to carefully check the dozens of time periods, hours, and hours per day to ensure they came to the correct values. The rest was a bonus. Sounds like a nice ride on your part, to be honest. And like the client in question might have realized that your very favorable contract wasn't entirely your fault since they changed the terms later but didn't come after you or refuse to hire you again. For all we know, your, quote, boss might have been under pressure from his superiors to have more accountability from his contractors. This kind of just seems like a nice little extra bonus for you. Personally, if I pulled a loophole like this on a client, I would be worried about losing them. But then again, I'm freelance, and if you have an agency that just kind of constantly gives you work, maybe that's not an issue for you. Am I the jerk for getting upset at my girlfriend for giving a tattoo to my mum? I'm a 25-year-old male, and my girlfriend, 22, and I have been together for over a year. She's covered in tattoos, which I've always liked. She's always been artistic and has been tattooing herself and her friends for years. My parents are more conservative and traditional, so when they planned a trip to visit us, I told her to just wear longer clothes to cover them up. She refused, and on the day they visited, she wore a crop top with shorts which showed off most of her tattoos. I warned her again before they came in about it, but she just shrugged me off. I was shocked when my parents came in and just started complimenting her on the tattoos, especially my mum. My mum spent ages to her talking about tattoos, so me and my dad went out to the backyard. When we came back in, my mum rushed up to my father to show off the tattoo my girlfriend gave her. It was 4 small flowers running up her arm. She said it represented our family. My dad loved it, and my mum was busy telling everyone on Facebook about it. My girlfriend then came downstairs and I asked her why she'd put that on my mum without asking me. She laughed in my face and said my mum was a grown woman. My parents then took my girlfriend's side, so I just stormed off upstairs. I could hear them for hours downstairs until my parents left. It's been a few days and I can't bring myself to talk to her after she did that behind my back. Sir, I regularly lose my crap at people in these stories for trying to control their own children, and for restricting their right to free action when they become adults. In fact, that makes up a substantial portion of the stories we run here. But that runs both ways, damn it! Your mother is an adult and can make whatever aesthetic changes to her body she damn well pleases, regardless of what you and your father think. It's just a massive bonus that in this case your dad was as thrilled as everyone else. It may be that your parents have just mellowed out in their old age and maybe aren't as high-strung as you pictured them in your head anymore. They seem nice from this limited window, but thank you for stopping our usual trend of all the people who write the posts not being the jerk. This one's on you. Grow up and recognize the rights of other grown-ups. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. Or if you want to check out some great music, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, give Am I the Genius a shot. Everything linked in the description.